All right, let me dive in for this topic today. So this is identification. This is this has been a frustrating point for me. It's been with what is identification for most of my life. I hadn't really owned how annoying the whole topic was until pretty recently. Um, so, like for a bit of context, um, like what I'm talking about when I'm referring to the word identification, there's a whole lot of um, like there's this common thing that'll show up in yoga. I heard people talk about how there's a point where you come to have this experience from either doing meditative yoga or calisthenic yoga, which is what most people think of with in the West when they use the word yoga. Um, but there's some point of a kind of spiritual evolution or practice or whatever where you'll realize, oh, I'm not my thoughts. This is a shift in identification because we get so identified with our thoughts, like thinking that we are our thoughts, or not thinking, but experiencing thoughts as though those are who we are. And I grew up in a context of my father emphasizing that kind of language of like, what does it mean to identify? He would talk about a process that he would describe as spiritual fusion, having to do with bringing your perspective to behind your eyes, like you're looking out these giant windows, like the eyes are these windows, right? So the sense in which, in order to gesture to you, it makes sense for me to point right there through the window so that you're looking out, so that you're behind your eyes, like you're in your head, like a homunculus, looking out. And when you get that kind of perspective of, oh, I'm right here, where I can see these pink blobs in the corners of my vision if I pay attention, my nose in my peripheral vision from each eye. There's an awareness there. Great. And so that kind of perspective lets me recognize, well, if I'm experiencing something, then I'm not that something. So clearly I am not my hand, which most people don't have difficulty with, and I'm not my mind. Wow, that's mind-blowing. And I don't mean to dismiss the relevance of that experience for a lot of people. Maybe having that revelation is important. But I've always found this really confusing. I don't think I have ever had anything that resembles a subjective impression that I am my mind, or that I am my thoughts, or that I am my feelings. I remember hearing my parents tell me in this kind of chant as I was growing up, not a chant, but they would remind me, remember, when you're feeling really strong feelings, you're not your feelings. And it didn't make any sense to me because I had no idea what it would mean to believe that I am my feelings. I'm feeling angry, or I'm feeling confused, or, or scared. Great, that's there. So, what does it mean to identify? Then there's this stuff that people identify a whole lot with their sports team or with their political beliefs. I have strong attachments. I definitely have strong, clear attachments. I experience those quite vividly. But I don't have an experience that I would relate to identity. So the reason this is coming up, I describe this in some fair bit in the text attached to this video. There's for me this big question I'm looking at, and I notice how readily I'm hooked by stuff. Like just like this morning, having a wonderful conversation with my parents, and I kept noticing these ways in which I wanted to finish my point. Why was it so important for me to finish my point? That made it more important than being present to the connection I had with my mother and with my father. I had to remind myself a couple of times in the middle of that, people are more important than ideas. The value of this conversation is in being with my parents and feeling the connection with them. The ideas can add value to the experience of that connection, but it's not about the ideas. The ideas aren't the important thing. Exactly what we were talking about isn't that key to this. I mean, it's related, but it's but I would fnd myself, particularly when Dad was talking, that there's this I would get hooked by. Oh, but let me explain. Like you're confused about this contradiction in these two philosophies, but I see the contradiction. Here's the thing, and here's the explanation that resolves it. Here's how you can deal with it, and here's the mechanics of the internal experience for dealing with it. I see it. I know the theory. Let me share it with you. And then he would interject and go on something that to me seemed like, okay, I hear what you're saying, and that's aside from what the point I'm trying to make. I'm trying to make this point. Let me bring it back to this point. I was so intent. I had to. What's the energy? Let go, be present. What's true here? Over and over and over again. And this particular conversation wasn't unusual for this. I actually found it quite pleasant, very easy. But still this contraction. Because there were pieces where I noticed myself getting a little hooked, like I need to make this point. I want to be done with these. I can imagine feeling hooked. I've experienced this many, many times, this feeling hooked and watching as my whole system revs up, but having this sense of, yep, and here's the shift I can make to digest that hook instead of being hooked by it and getting lost. And then having to catch myself, bring myself back, do a kind of process, go find the energy in my body. Oh, there it is. Okay. Digest. This often takes like between minutes and days, but depending on how big the thing is and how confused I am. But there's something like, I don't have to go through all that rigmarole. I could just watch it. Watch the hook in real time and go, oh, there I am being hooked. There's the feeling underneath. Let me fully experience it. Great, and now I'm engaged. Or even, oh, I'm really activated, super activated, cool, let me take some space. But this place where I get hooked and then confused in a way that makes it so that I can't be kind anymore, that I can't be present to the connection. Like I'm hallucinating whatever it was that had me put the hook back in the first place. Thinking of things like there being there was a particular incident when I was, must have been 16, I think I was 16, where I'd had an interaction with my scoutmaster. I was in the Boy Scouts, and I won't give the whole story, but there was a moment where it's the closest to initiating violence I think I have ever experienced in my life. I really wanted to smash his head through the window behind him. I was really pissed off. And the entire lead up to that moment, at the end, nothing happened. My parents showed up, I left, and I mostly dropped my emotional engagement with Boy Scouts from that point forward. But there's a sense of enormous rage and a feeling like there's no place to put that rage because I didn't want to actually enact violence, but part of me really wanted to. And like feeling all of that, sort of having that trapped, I can imagine later in my life, there have been a couple of instances where I encountered a use of power, like my Scoutmaster used power, that I found vehemently morally repulsive and not whatsoever okay. Using status to harm children just because they can. Like I imagine you can hear it and feel it even in the tone that I'm bringing here. Like I'm not even describing the situation, but there's this hookiness, this like, how dare he, how dare they? So when I encounter things that remind me of that by default, there's kind of this flash, not fully cognitive, but like an emotional memory. The hat tip to Malcolm Ocean for pointing out this concept to me about going into emotional flashbacks. Like having this kind of emotional flashback where I'm emotionally back in the situation with that Scoutmaster, where I am feeling this blatant abuse of power in what appears to me a purely sadistic form. And in me, there's just this desire to kill, destroy. This is not acceptable. So finding things that remind me of that, getting activated that way, there's something about that's this system getting activated and transported back into time. But I can be present to that and still feel the connection while the system is going, like while my body and my emotions and even my mind are doing all these crazy things. I can still experience what's going on and be in connection sometimes. And sometimes I really can't. I just get swept into this sea and I cannot orient. So what I would really love, like what I really, really love, is to be unhookable, for me, for the act of feeling that hook propelling me into the past to cause the digestion. That would be wonderful. It's like, please, can I have that? Can I be unhookable? That would be wonderful. And I could sort of see how it's possible. Something like being really anchored outside of the storm. Or anchored throughout the storm, or I don't quite know how to describe this, but I've had glimpses of this even when being extremely activated, extremely upset, still being, oh, I am feeling super upset and it's really hard for me to control my voice and my mind is going crazy, but I'm still here. If you can handle this, let's keep going, because I have the space to hold this poor creature flipping out, going through emotional flashbacks, and you just need to digest this for a few moments or a few minutes. Or even, hey, I need some time. This animal called Michael needs some time to digest this experience. Give me a bit. I'll be in touch later. To have that kind of clarity that cuts through the storm, that is undissuadable. I've had glimpses of this and it builds over time, but I don't want to access that only because I have digested each hook. I want it to be independent of the hook ability. I can feel that. I can feel that option. It sort of tickles on the horizon. I have a lot of excitement. I could be free in this systematic way. I really want that. So I look around and I try to find out, how do you do it? What are instructions for doing it? And the instructions I get are things like, oh, well, stop identifying with the things that hook you. And that part just confuses me. In the conversations I had, I wouldn't say I was identified with. Like in the conversation with Dad, I wasn't identified with the idea I was trying to share, because it didn't feel like I'm that. If you ask me which part's me and which part is the idea, I have no trouble distinguishing. There's no confusion. Maybe in the middle, there's something kind of like a confusion, sort of like if somebody steps on my foot, or if someone like kicks my leg, I'll say, hey, you kicked me. Well, no, I kicked your leg. That's not you. Well, thanks, smartass, but you still kicked me as far as I'm concerned. there's like a blurring of something that I can call identity, and in that sense I would be identified with the leg, but there's no confusion there. There's no like, oh, but am I really the leg? No. I'm not the leg any more than I am this computer that I'm talking on, any more than I am the concept that I am sharing. It's like these are things that there's kind of this fuzzy mental tool that I use, where I use I, me, the concept of self, as kind of a placeholder for relating to self and other, and those boundaries need to be fluid. Same kind of thing as if I'm driving and somebody swerves in front of me and cuts me off, right? Or somebody swerves in a less elegant way and hits me. I say hits me by default rather than hits my car, even though both are equivalent. There's a kind of expansion of identity that happens there. And by identity there, I mean something like, how do my concepts use the sense of self in order to navigate the situation? Very fluid boundaries. That totally makes sense to me. What doesn't make sense is this thing of, oh, well, just stop identifying with anything that changes and retreat your identity to this awareness that witnesses all of existence, that is stable. Because it doesn't make sense to say, oh, this function that I'm using in order to figure out which part of the body is mine, or which part of the physical world is me and which part is not me, in the sense of, well, I need to, like saying, I need to wash this body. Well, who's washing it? Well, it's not really me. I'm not washing it if I'm identified with the awareness. It's more like washing happens because this body, and there's a thought about washing, and then the thought creates some kinds of images that move some sort of energy in the body that creates a motive force, and the motive force involves getting up and going to the shower and doing this washing process. Great. This seemed like a very complicated way of describing what to me looks like exactly the same thing. And in particular, I don't feel like being careful to avoid moving the sense of self out to the body's edge. I don't feel like avoiding doing that actually helps me be less hookable in any meaningful way in terms of the shower. There'd still be a pretty big objection if, I don't know, if I suddenly slipped. And I can try to be really careful with this. If the foot, if this body's foot hits an edge and in a funny way, and then slips and falls and ends up breaking the foot, and then there would be thoughts about how unpleasant this experience is, and like a lot of screaming possibly, and a sense of urgency. This doesn't deal with the way that the system gets hooked. It just does a funny thing with concept and language, something like how the mind is drawing boundaries, that doesn't address the core issue of something like, why is there an inclination? Like like, yes, these are my clothes. If these clothes get torn, it's like I'm annoyed, but I'm not devastated. Whereas if I write a carefully thought out article and someone replies and saying, I've read through this and I think you're just wrong and you haven't thought about this at all. It's like, oh, like that's, there's some, like, and I don't think I am the article, but there's something else going on there. There's some sort of, like, my source of value being placed there. So when I reflect on experiences of transcendental experiences of self, where I've had a dramatic shift, and I've had an experience of, oh, I'm not Michael. Michael is sort of this, it's somewhere between a pet and a suit. It's like an intelligent spacesuit, so to speak, for navigating this world of, like, this physical world. It's kind of a funny way of describing it, as though there's a physical world and then there's a non-physical world. Well, language is tricky in this case. But even having that experience and then getting that into the mind feels like, oh, it's not just a matter of shifting identity, it's a matter of correcting the mind's impression of how reality works. Talking about it as a shift in identity and what I am identified with feels like a distraction. Like, it has nothing, it's not about me. It has nothing to do with me. It's about this suit could work better if it were better configured to the truth of how I interface with it and what reality is. So what actually feels true, feels real to me. There's kind of a loopiness about the logic of, what is identification? Well, it's that which has you attached to things. Great, so what's attachment? Attachment is when you identify with something. So ignoring the logical circularity there and noticing, well, these are experiences. There's actually an experiential structure. There's something like, I want clear phenomenological instructions. How do I let go? Sometimes I can let go. Sometimes I can't. What distinguishes them? How do I let go more? I'm less interested in the theory. There's a way where I sort of want the meaning of that question to land, especially in myself, differently than the default. I feel myself getting better at this way of landing, which is instead of landing in the mind and having the mind answer the question, what answers can you produce when reflecting on this question? I'm less interested in that. What I'm much more interested in is looking in how my body works, how the energies and emotions work, how I interface with them. Excuse me. Feeling into that and discovering the lived, enacted answer to how do I let go? Like this. So right now, I'm noticing this this bit of a feeling of dissatisfaction, of something like when I model a listener in my mind to what I've just said. That's actually not quite it. That's what happens second. The first is a feeling of dissatisfaction, like I have not heard in the words that are coming out what feels like the essence of what I want to say here. Yeah, I don't feel satisfied with what I've said here. And I feel a little blank about how to continue. Like I see a direction, but I want to take a clear stock of, okay, then in this moment, here is this juncture where the next movement is modeling the audience and then booting up embarrassment, because the embarrassment is something like it's part of a drive cycle. It's part of how I hook myself, how I make myself hook a bull. I imagine the audience and then I feel the embarrassment as part of a drive to try to fix something about how the audience is receiving me, which starts to lean in the direction of victim triangle type stuff. So wanting not to do that, I can feel the direction I want to go. But I see Daniel Blanc has popped in. How does one do that consistently? It seems like hooks try to take up enough space to make one forget to let go. You're going to have to clarify what that is. If you're asking how to let go consistently, that is exactly the question I'm exploring. The short answer is I don't know. I'm working on feeling into a real answer to that. I'm doing it more and more consistently, but it's like I'm going from 3 to 5 to 8%. Like, but that's oh yeah, yes, let go consistently. Yep. I'm going to guess that the intellectual answer is to sincerely ask the question. Sounds very Zen. I think Zen is great at giving correct answers that are useless. To do my best to make it a little bit more useful. My current guess is that the act of sincerely wanting an answer to this question, how do I let go consistently? And to recognize specifically, I notice in myself there's this temptation to try to figure it out, but the try to figure it out has a graspy nature to it in my mind. So that means that I will be enacting the very thing I am trying to figure out how to stop enacting by trying to figure it out. So that's not me looking at the mechanism by which I let go. That's me distracting myself in almost exactly the opposite direction while creating this illusion that I am making progress by thinking about it. For me, I can see that thinking about it distracts, whereas if I pay attention to the quality of being hooked and what works and what doesn't for letting go, I notice that I move in a direction that feels like an actual lived answer to the question, how do I let go consistently? Not by that, not by that. That was promising. But like here in this case, it doesn't quite work. So that's my current best guess, and this is part of me exploring this. there's this one piece. It feels central, and I don't quite see the logic of it yet. Um, so in continuing some chats with Carissa, my day 27, you can do the math. I think it's like what 4 days ago, technically 5 because I missed one day. The From the day 27 conversation with Carissa, following up from that one chat that we had was basically about these emotional flashbacks. What's involved in, like, the reason the hooks are there in the first place is like there's like standard psychoanalytic theory that there's some part of the psyche that gets frozen in a certain state because there's an attempt to enact an emotion, some sort of movement, often a literal physical movement, but an energetic movement as well, an emotional movement. You can't touch me that way, or I'm really sad, or something like that. There's some sort of energy there that then gets isolated, gets stopped from processing, and shoved into the subconscious. Um, an example would be if like a very young child uh, growing up with an alcoholic parent who hits them, attacks them, beats them badly. If the child speaks up, there might be a lot of anger, but if you're talking about something like a 6-year-old, the 6-year-old doesn't have the physical power needed for that anger to draw the boundary that's needed to create safety, and could in fact summon threat. So it becomes very important to alienate the anger, to block the anger from being expressed, to block it from being processed in a meaningful way, so that gets sectioned off. So if somebody's gone through an arc like that, they may find that there's this part of them that is emotionally 6, locked in anger. And there'd be a more mature, but still not very mature, suppression mechanism that would appear in order to prevent mental attention from going to the anger. So in a situation like that, the person would experience, anytime there is something that reminds them of the situation they had when growing up, they'll have the emotional flashback like they're 6. And then the distraction mechanism that they used to create the suppression in the first place would boot up. So they might find themselves losing all their energy and all their drive. And like a classic example of transmitted transgenerational trauma is reaching for a bottle to numb out their feelings. So you can end up with alcoholism transmitted across generations. Classic example of what I would call a demon, like this entity that creates this lived pattern across these generations. Although the more common term for this is a meme. So in a situation like that, there's the important part is that, like, I notice that when I get hooked, when I get these kinds of emotional flashbacks, like there's this key idea that I got from Carissa in a chat that we had earlier this morning that I found fascinating. She pointed out that she finds it really valuable to notice when she suddenly finds herself switching into present tense in cases where it doesn't make sense. She was sharing an experience of a dream. She actually posted about this dream on her own wall. So you can actually look at examples of what she's talking about if you want to follow up. But the type of example would be, if I have a dream where in the dream I went to an apple orchard and I found an apple, and then I picked it up, and now I'm really pissed off and I don't know why. Okay? There's a switch there in terms of tense. I was describing this fictional dream in the past tense, saying I went into the apple orchard, I bent down, I picked up the apple, and now I'm pissed. Right? So there's this temporal sticking point. Like somehow there was something about that moment that even when reflecting on it, there would be some tendency to talk about it as though it is present right now, as though that is the moment I am stuck in. This stuck in time quality struck me as really insightful of something. It's reminiscent of emotional flashbacks, like the part of the psyche that is caught in a time loop outside of time. It's stuck in this moment of, I am angry at the alcoholic parent. Just for clarity's sake, by the way, I did not grow up alcoholic. That part's, or I didn't grow up alcoholic, and I didn't grow up with alcoholic parents. Um, but this is a common enough example type, it seems worth pulling on. Mind is moving super fast and getting disembodied. So this bit about having these emotional flashbacks, like this part of the psyche is sectioned off. There's a hint that feels very alive for me about, when am I not right here, right now? When do my eyes not see what they're pointed at? Did I choose not to be looking at what my eyes are pointed at? That's an example. And what I mean is the stuff about, how does that work? Like, I'm clearly not looking at the ceiling, I'm thinking. I'm sort of looking at the thoughts. Like visualizing a sphere, then slicing it, noticing that slicing with a plane creates a circle regardless of what angle, and I'm clearly not looking over there. So that kind of not looking where my eyes are pointed. But there's also something of, there's this feeling of not being really present, not seeing the reality that's right in front of me. This feels closely intertwined with what I was exploring yesterday about having a sneaking suspicion that anytime I see something other than heaven, or maybe it would be more appropriate to say, if I see anything other than truth, if I'm seeing anything other than the real. But a good general handle is something hooky. Like if I'm being grabbed, then I'm not here. I'm projecting, I'm painting the world. What am I painting it with? I'm painting it with some kind of hallucination. I'm time traveling. I'm having an emotional flashback. I don't have a coherent theory here. There's more like a strong intuition of, I can sense something like, as not just a matter of making myself be present every moment. It's something more like noticing the feeling of, like the body feeling, this power that comes up in the body, of what draws me away from the present moment. What makes it make sense for me to suddenly get lost in needing to articulate this idea, which has a kind of atemporality to it. I don't even know when I am. I don't have a clear sense of what the moment is. Although it occurred to me this morning, I might actually know why I disembody. I have some journaling and some exploration to do before I share anything about that. But yeah, so this to me feels like it's answering, it's starting to go in the direction of answering meaningfully, how do I let go of attachment? How do I actually let go of attachment? Grasping or aversion, how do I actually let go? Not because that's what I'm supposed to do, but because I can look around and see every place where I can be hooked, I can see exactly why and how that creates things I don't like. It doesn't make sense for me to carry these around. I can see in some detail how I contribute to difficulty in the world by being hookable, and how by being clear I can encourage a good world. To go even a little bit farther, I think my inclination to view this world as ungood is itself an expression of my hookability. There's something distorted. I'm starting to see the wavelines, the distortion in the air, in the mind, between me and reality. And I want to be in touch with truth. All of that feels a lot clearer to me than talking about identifying with awareness. I have a suspicion that there's something here I'm missing. Because it's not just, oh, I think this language is better. It's something more like whenever anybody talks about identification, it doesn't make sense to me. It doesn't parse. I guess I could say something like I want to identify less with the ideas that I want to express. But again, it doesn't. I would never confuse myself for the ideas. If somebody proved the idea wrong, I would feel hurt. Like if for instance, there's a kind of attachment flavor to a lot of the way that I talk about memes. I have this sense of there's this beautiful metaphor that like the same thing that lets me look at my cats and treat the cats as though they are conscious beings that have likes and dislikes, and that I can make them happy, and that their purring is an expression of them being happy, and that feels good to me. The same way it feels good to encourage happiness and well-being in people I love. I can imagine the same thing with the cats. The cats don't have the same hardware or software for social stuff that I do. I think they have some of it, but not all of it. So the entity-ness with which I perceive them is very much a projection. But there's a part of me that just knows, yeah, and part of that projection is just dead on. The way that it's not dead on for, say, when I'm trying to make sense of, is this cup happy? Oh, let me make sure that it's cleaned and well taken care of. There's a part of me that knows, yeah, the cup doesn't have that kind of reflectiveness. Right? In the same kind of way, it seems to me that, like, and part of the reason being, there's a part of me that is tracking something like real entityness. And maybe in some subtle way the cup secretly has some entityness to it, but not as an object. It would have to be as something else. It's not a living thing. In the same way, it seems to me that it's possible to use this same software, to this same intuitive social software, to intuit memes as entities with desires and intents and fears and plans and a survival instinct and cunning with skills. Like they are beings. It totally makes sense to think of them as beings. If my cats can be beings, then absolutely memes can. Absolutely. So noticing that idea and the things that idea does, and there's a kind of graspiness to it. Even the way that I was talking about it here. This is part of this whole, I would really like to be done with hooks. I really want to be done with attachment. The attachment that I feel to that idea was part of the energy with which I was saying, it absolutely makes sense. And why? Well, that is the feeling. It's me taking the internal sense of, no, this is my idea. This is precious, it's valuable. And then projecting it outward to say, you need to view it as valuable. You need to feel this. Right? Me trying to hook you. That's not kind. It's not kind to you. It's not kind to myself. Even if the idea is correct, that's irrelevant. The hookiness creates problems systematically. So with that hookiness there, if somebody came forward and said, well, here is why actually you can't do that extension. It actually creates more suffering to have that as a view at all. This is why it's logically mistaken. Like, here's this breakdown. I've encountered people who've tried to do that and they're wrong. Like, most of the time it has to do with ripping down a straw man version of the meme guess. And a lot of them have to do with, well, if they are like entities, if they're like living beings, then Where's their genetic code? What exactly is the piece of information that they're transmitting from one person to another? Is it an idea? Is it a thought? Is it a behavior? What is it? And it's like, um, this is ignoring the relevance of the idea in order to take the analogy too strongly. And there's anger and frustration in me that comes from the hook, but I'm getting a little off to the weeds. So if it were to happen, somebody could really just discredit the idea, saying, look, this is stupid, you weren't paying attention to this thing. It would hurt, and it would hurt through the hook. But I wouldn't have any impression that even if the idea had just died, just been unequivocally, no, this is gone, this does not work, I would feel some sorrow and some sense of embarrassment and a little bit of disorientation. But I wouldn't feel like I had died or that someone had cut off my limb. So I am under the impression that there's something that a lot of mystically inclined folk mean. I suspect it's not everybody. I think there's probably a meme floating around using the word identification. Don't identify so much with your beliefs. What they mean is don't attach your value to the beliefs. Don't be so hookable. Digest the activation patterns. I think that's what they usually mean. But I suspect that there's something that some of them mean when they're talking about what amounts to, look at who you are and notice how you're confusing who you are with something else. I have basically zero conscious experience of confusing myself with anything else beyond the way in which I confuse myself with my car when I'm driving. But it takes basically no effort for me to recognize, well, of course I'm not my car. But I talk about people hitting me when I'm driving instead of hitting my car. I don't mean they break my window and punch my body. I mean their car scrapes against mine. Okay. In exactly the same way that I would say that I have had a surgery when really what I've had is I experienced going under anesthesia and then experiencing the result of somebody having cut into my shoulder. There's no confusion there. I think if they had surgically removed my arm, I would be upset. I was using that. I cared about that. I'm attached to my arm in a very literal sense, and I don't like having that attachment removed. Thank you. I think that upsetness would spiritually get described in terms of, oh, I still have an ego attachment to the arm. Yeah. And there I get confused. Like, what is identification? How is the me being used differently? What is the difference between identifying with my car and identifying with my idea of memes? Is that at all different from the energy of being hooked in the body? If there's an extra thing, I'd be a little interested in understanding that, because there may be some sort of huge insight that I'm just completely blasé to. But from where I'm standing, or I'm sitting, I guess I'm sitting right now. So far as I can tell, this all comes back down to this clinginess. So, yeah. If somebody has a clear explanation of what identification is, that doesn't say identification is when you think you are something that you aren't. If it can give a phenomenological description of that mechanism, that also doesn't just go circularly through, oh, identification is when you are attached to something. You have grasping or aversion related to it. Okay, well then what's grasping and aversion? Ah, it is when you are identified. If someone out there has an actual clear explanation, either in themselves or they have a reference to it that explains, this is the experience of identification, I would actually really enjoy seeing that so that I could have some understanding, and it might provoke something pretty powerful in me. But as it is, I'm starting to suspect that no one knows what they're talking about, and that they're actually just describing the mechanism of being hooked. And that's actually the relevant part. Yep, so there's my bit of arrogance for the day. I feel reasonably complete. I feel like I talked about two different things. That's fine. Yeah, so I think I'm done.